Two European powerhouses in danger of not qualifying for the next stage of the Champions League. PSG versus Man City takes on added importance because of both sides' poor form in this year's competition. Kim, as the Man City fan, the resident Man City fan, is this game a must-win for City?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let's just talk about the game. In 2021, this was a semi-final of the Champions League that City won to get to their first final. And now look at it. Yeah. This is a game which is pretty much must-win for both teams to qualify in a Champions League season where you just have to not be the worst 8 out of 32 teams.
Yeah.
What is going on?
I know.
I mean, there are just so many problems at Manchester City. I could go blue in the face talking about them. I think I would quite like to speak about the Brentford game midweek, the 2-2, and I think there were a few things that stood out for me. First of all, there is a severe lack of confidence there. Mm-hmm. Players are doing things that they've never done before. I saw Guardiola, and it's not even big things, but you're just seeing players take touches that are way too heavy or turning back just in case the touch isn't perfect and they get robbed. That's not what Pep Guardiola's Manchester City are known for, and that's not why they've been successful. So to see what has happened over the last few months has been really surprising. I thought there was going to be a little bit of change in form. Obviously, 2-0 against Leicester, 4-1 against West Ham, and then 8-0 against Salford. I know they're in League Two, but they're flying high, and it was still a fantastic performance. And then you 2-0 up in the 80th minute against Brentford. It's a really tough place to go. We said it in the other video. Brentford have got the most points at home, joint most points at home as Liverpool. But to concede those 2 goals in the way you do is really, really...
Could have conceded a third as well.
Then they could have conceded a third. And you look at the graph for teams who have defended balls into their box. Manchester City are right at the bottom left-hand corner of that graph. The closest to them is Southampton, and they're miles away. You need binoculars to see where Southampton are from Manchester City. That is a massive, massive problem. But look, it's January.
Yeah.
City are going to go to the transfer market. We know that already. Looks like 2 centre-backs are being brought in, 18-year-old Victor Reyes from Palmeiras and Kusanov as well, who from YouTube videos looks like a bit of an enforcer.
Yeah.
It also looks like we're getting Omar Marmoush. He's obviously one of Europe's hot properties. So hopefully things will start to change. But this is a massive, massive game because City cannot afford to not be in the next round of the Champions League.
Or PSG. And for me, this game, in terms of the tail of the tape, I'm looking at the managers. And if I think about the greatest football teams that I have ever seen, I take my mind back to Pep Guardiola's Barcelona team in 2011. And I take my mind back to Luis Enrique, who's PSG's manager, Barcelona team in 2015 that had MSN. And I think for both of these sides, the managers seem bereft of ideas. And you start with Pep Guardiola. He's a manager just used to winning, right? In his time as a manager, there's only been 3 managers that have taken titles off of him. And they are 3 of the greatest managers of all time. Jose Mourinho at Real Madrid, Antonio Conte, his first season in England when he won it with Chelsea, and then Jurgen Klopp in 2020. That's it. Pep Guardiola's won the league in every single season, apart from those 3 years. This season's very different, right? And people talk about a Man City rebuild halfway through the season, but they need to, for financial reasons, and we don't need to get onto the charges and that lingering thing over your head, but they need to qualify for the next phase of Champions League for financial reasons. They take on the PSG side that have gone in a different direction, right? They used to be big spenders. They've changed their emphasis in terms of bringing in younger talent. It looks like Kvaratskhelia is joining them this window as well. But they've made hard work of things, despite the fact they're top of League 1. That they've struggled not only in the league but in cup competitions, and they find themselves teetering on the edge in the Champions League. For this game, say PSG were to lose, or say Man City were to lose, do you think that's the end of their hopes in terms of qualifying for the next phase of the Champions League?
I think for City, if you look at the table, they'd probably be out of the qualification spaces, but they have got Club Brugge at home in the final game, which I think is a pretty winnable fixture. I think it's just going to be really difficult because I think there's clearly a big psychological issue at Manchester City at the moment. As you mentioned, Pep Guardiola doesn't know how to lose. These players have absolutely no idea how to lose, and they're really in the thick of it at the moment. One thing I did, and I do want to mention, and I don't want it to come across as ungrateful, right?
Go on.
I need to talk about Erling Haaland.
Oof.
Because there's an Erling Haaland conundrum, and I've thought it for a long time, and I think recently my belief has been enforced. And he's probably one of the greatest goal scorers of all time.
Yes.
He's almost certainly the greatest goal scorer that Manchester City have had. However, when you look at the signing of Erling Haaland, to me, it seemed like a deal with the devil. Manchester City had a perfect team. They had a perfect team apart from a number 9 who could score goals. They bought Erling Haaland for 53 million, the best 53 million they'll ever spend, and in the first season they won the treble. But in doing so, they've reshaped the entire team. Because Erling Haaland is not a Manchester City player. He's not got a good touch. He's not particularly quick. He doesn't press well. He can't pass the ball. So you have to restructure your whole team around him. And it worked when Manchester City and all of their players were at the peak of their powers. And Erling Haaland was just dropped into that team and it worked perfectly. Now, the players aren't there and Haaland's shortcomings are really, really, really coming into the fore.
You went through his credentials. In his first season, broke the record for the amount of goals in the Premier League, and you won the treble. And he's been the top goal scorer in the league every year he's been here. And you expect him to get to 20 goals in his sleep every season. Yeah. This is a bad season for him, right? He's on more goals than Alexander Isak, or the same amount of goals as Isak, who everybody's raving about. So I agree with you. He's the greatest goal scorer I've ever seen, just in terms of putting the ball in the back of the net. But you might be onto something in terms of his play is not necessarily detrimental to the way that City play, but it doesn't fit in seamlessly. And I can understand the year before Haaland joined why you were so heavily linked with Harry Kane, because he doesn't have pace, but in terms of a passer, in terms of his understanding of the game, in terms of his ability to link up play, he's way more of a City striker than Erling Haaland. But if you've got Erling Haaland on the table and he wants to come to you and you have to spend £53 million, you do that deal. Yeah. And it paid dividends because you won the Champions League. But I can understand the team that has an aging Kevin De Bruyne who really brought the best out of Haaland in terms of their connectivity and the way they linked up. And De Bruyne's probably not going to be there next season. I understand why, as a City fan, there is some trepidation, some worry in terms of what does this team look like long term with Erling Haaland leading the line.
For me, I think there is a solution to the Haaland problem, but again, you would be changing the team around. I think you look at the Manchester City team. Pep Guardiola's never had a left back at City, and Kyle Walker is done and will probably never play for Manchester City again. And apart from that, apart from Rico Lewis, who again is not a natural right back, City do not have full backs. But they do have centre-backs, and they're bringing in 2 more centre-backs. And I would love, if Marmoush is to come, if that deal is going to get over the line, I would love to see a 3-5-2. I would love to see him play alongside Haaland, because Guardiola did do it with Gabriel Jesus and Aguero, the season where City broke the points total, which has still never been broken and probably won't again. He did play a 3-5-2. He played both of them up front. And City have the players. You have Jack Grealish and Mateus Nunes, who can play in those left wing-back roles, particularly until the end of the season, until they can buy someone. And of course, we know that the strength of this Manchester City team, even at the moment, is still in the options of creative midfielders. They've got Phil Foden, they've got Bernardo Silva, they've got De Bruyne. Kovacic has been really good recently. When Rodri comes back, he can fit in that role. I would love to see City line up like that, because this 2 wide players on weaker foot trying to play the ball into Haaland is not working. And you can see it, and you saw it against Brentford. After about 20 minutes, he just stopped running. I was watching him and he was just lolloping around the pitch. And it must be frustrating for him because balls aren't coming in.
Yeah, no, I've not really heard that from many City fans, but I can understand why you think there needs to be a change, because things aren't working. And we thought City had turned the corner, and then you have that last 10 minutes against Brentford where it changes the complexion of everything. I do think in this game against PSG, though, you go in, despite the fact you're away from home, you go in as favourites because of, I think, the lack of firepower and the lack of weapons that can hurt you for PSG. Of course, they've got some really exciting players. You think about Zaire Emery, who's one of the most exciting young players in the world. But I just don't know if they've got enough to take down the City side. So I guess it's time for predictions, mate. And the must-win game for your side in the Champions League, bear in mind you won the competition 2 years ago, PSG versus Man City. What's your score prediction?
2-1 to PSG.
Really?
Yeah, honestly, I look at the players who can hurt us, and I look at Ousmane Dembele and Barcola.
Yeah.
Pace. It's something that City cannot contend with. They weren't particularly good at it last year, and they won the league. Now they really, really can't contend with it. And I think you look at the 11s and you think, oh my God, yeah, that team's definitely favourites. All you have to do is pass the eye test of watching a 90-minute City performance. They're just not the same players anymore. It's just not the same team. And I think City will qualify because I think they'll beat Bruges heavily, but I really do think they'll lose to PSG.
I'm going to sit on the fence on this one. I think these are 2 teams that are shadows of their former selves in terms of European competitions, but I think it will end up being a draw. Good game, 2-2.